The Port Podcast with Craig Bell Estabrooks.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Port Podcast. We've got a beautiful cruise ship behind us in sunny St. John, New Brunswick here in mid-October as we begin to wrap up our cruise season. We've got a very special guest who's traveled to St. John today, Monica Justason with the New Brunswick Business Council. I have a pleasure of working with Monica in that capacity, and there's a lot of files and excitement around the work that you do, Monica. So we're really, really excited to have you here to give us that New Brunswick perspective. We are at a very crucial moment in time as a country and a province about growth and trade diversification, infrastructure investments, technology, the future, AI. We're going to touch on a lot of different subjects today. We're not going to get through everything, but we are thrilled to have you here. I do want to start, before we dive into everything New Brunswick and your role and your perspective, just talk a little bit about what led you to this role. What has your journey looked like, and how did you arrive at the New Brunswick Business Council last year?
Well, great. Thanks for having me. And I'll try not to be distracted with this amazing cruise ship. And I will add that I don't think I've ever been in St. John in October and it was this warm. So
very warm.
The guests who are traveling around, the tourists, are having a great day. But thanks again for having me. I'm excited to talk to you. There's so much to talk about. I'm sure we'll run out of time. But to give you a bit of insight as to why I got here and how I got here, it actually starts very early in my life. I grew up as part of an Acadian family, a very proud one. And as a child, my father would tell me stories about our survival and our resilience. And we talked a lot about the importance of collaboration and partnership, because in the very early days of Acadian history, we survived in part because of our relationships with the Indigenous community that we lived side by side with. And as early as the 1600s, we figured out how to build dikes with the Indigenous people. The French knew engineering. The Indigenous community knew about the land and the tides. And so together we built dikes, which are called aboiteaux. And that's how we started farming. And inch by inch, we created more farmland. And you might be saying, like, why is this important to your story, Monica? But it drove very much what I chose to do professionally. So in the early days, I was like at most normal young people and just kept my head down, took the first job. But I ended up getting into the consulting industry with Anderson Consulting, which is now one of the big fours, Accenture. And so I got into this world because I wanted to make a difference. And you might say, well, how are you going to make a difference in consulting? But I worked in human services and healthcare for over 20 years. And so I worked in a sector that was very interesting. I felt like I was making an impact. And then I got into the idea that, well, I think other than public service or trying to help improve services to vulnerable people, I could help by helping drive the economy. So I went to a smaller consulting firm locally here called Mariner Innovations and helped that company grow and scale to what it is today. And I loved what they were about, and they were about giving back and developing the region. And I thought, well, how do I do that on kind of steroids? And that's what led me to the Business Council, because over the years I had watched the Business Council and saw the impact it was having. And I felt like the conditions were very unique in New Brunswick and in the country, where there was a high trust in business relative to perhaps the public service or governments or politics. So I thought, well, maybe I can kind of multiply the effect by representing members like yourself and amazing CEOs in the region that are trying to make a difference in their communities and for our province. So that's why I'm here.
I love when the backstory has an interconnected, weave. When we describe the history of the Port of St. John, I often go way far back as well. I just really think, Monica, it's important that people get the long-term arc of what we're all trying to accomplish. And I can personally attest, you've been a wonderful addition to the New Brunswick Business Council and what we're all trying to accomplish here as a collective. And there are tremendous talent that sit around the table
Yes.
that you lead, and I'm very fortunate to be part of that group. So let's dive into all things New Brunswick. 2025. It's been a year.
Yeah, it's been a year.
The premier was on an earlier edition, and 2 U.S. presidents, 2 Canadian prime ministers, all within a very short time at the beginning of the year. Trade diversification has now become a huge topic. A Canadian election was largely fought on trade and Canada's place in nation building projects and supply chains and all things that have been very, very important to New Brunswick for a long time. And from my perspective, it really has become clear that we play a massive role in Canada's future and nation building. So can you give us a little perspective of what you and the members of the New Brunswick Business Council, are thinking about where we all fit in the nation strategy?
Yeah, I think the Business Council is concerned about sort of 2 economic pillars. We think the things we should be looking at are around our competitiveness and growth. Like, is our economy growing, and are we able to compete on a global scale? And that helps identify the objectives that we think are important for the New Brunswick economy, which include talent, the business environment, the mindset around industry, and productivity. And so I think those are 4 key important areas, not for just the Business Council, but for the country. And it aligns very well with what's happening nationally. I think from a national level, we have strong leadership. There's a clear vision that we want to be one of the strongest economies in the G7, and very clear strategies that our Prime Minister is communicating around nation-building projects, energy projects, and natural resources, the critical minerals that we have. So I think we have a clear strategy, which is very helpful for provinces like ours.
Totally agree. And from the folks that you sit around the table with, what are some of the key things they would love to see New Brunswick tackle to make our region more competitive, and look at those 4 pillars that you've addressed?
Yeah. So I think immigration is obviously a very important element, and it falls within our talent strategic objective. And so, the recent immigration changes pose some challenges to us regionally because we have very unique needs. We have an aging population, retirements are going to be exponential, and we don't have enough talent to fill the pipeline. So, immigration is a very important issue. I think energy is a very critical topic for the council, because it not only do we need it for industrial growth, but we need it as an economic driver, because
no question
and the ports play a critically important role in the export of clean energy. So I think those are some of the big topics that are very top of mind. And of course, the trading relationship with our U.S. Partners is of key importance. And how do we tackle and de-risk that trading relationship?
Yeah, we on a previous podcast, we had Ron Marcolin, who represents CME for New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island.
Yeah.
And we got into a deep dive about how do we help companies look at this transition. So if you look at trade diversification, we talk a lot about this in the coastal ports and the 5 container ports across the country, Prince Rupert, Vancouver, Montreal, Halifax, and ourselves. We all feel we play a unique role, and then collectively we play a huge role together to try to find new trade routes for existing companies. So if you're a company situated in the province of New Brunswick, and you've traded, very well south of the border, and you want to continue that, but you're also looking for a little bit of diversification. Maybe the EU trade deal represents an opportunity, but you don't have knowledge within your country on, Antwerp and Rotterdam and Hamburg and, Southampton and some of the large, ports in the UK and within the EU that can very efficiently get your goods to a whole new market that you may not have seen. How do you, as a leader at the New Brunswick Business Council, help a company find out what kind of talent they may need to even pursue an opportunity they've never looked at before.
Right. Well, I think what's interesting about the Business Council is that the members are fairly sophisticated in this topic. But I think we play a role as leaders in the business community to say, well, here's the way for small and medium to start thinking about export in a more diversified global market. And I think not only is the Business Council critical in that awareness and education, but I think the ports being at the center really of global trade, especially in New Brunswick, because we're very much at the center of things, getting not only markets out to other diversified markets, but getting goods that we can spread across North America. So I think the ports are kind of the they're the launch pad for business, and you have a lot of expertise in transportation and logistics. So I think the ports have a very important role to play in education, awareness building, and advocacy with government about the criticality of having strong port infrastructure in the region.
Agreed. When we began our conversation about the Port of St. John joining the New Brunswick Business Council, I'm having a hard time with New Brunswick Business Council. I need an acronym for this podcast to get through, but to me, it's been the best platform I've ever experienced in my 14 years at the port, 4 years in the CEO role, getting to know other leaders from all corners of the province.
Yes.
Obviously, we interact with a lot of folks from southern New Brunswick. I've had the pleasure of interacting with a lot of, rail, container lines, terminal operators that operate across Canada and then globally as well. But I've never had a platform to meet people and to share best practices and ideas from a New Brunswick perspective like this, with the diversity that you've got around that table is remarkable, and the thought leadership on any topic. That's what blows me away. I want you to touch on this. It blows me away that regardless of what's on the agenda, you've got multiple people that are leaders on a subject.
Yeah. I think diversity of the membership is important because they represent not only different sectors, but they represent different parts of the province. So I think regionally we're very well represented. Industry, even enterprise size, a lot of people say, oh, it's only the big folks, but that's not true. There's strong diversity, and part of the purpose of the Business Council is to help inform and advocate for policy that supports business growth and competitiveness. So what you'll find when we touch on different topics and we bring different experts, we want to ensure that our members are well informed, and that when they're talking about issues pertinent to industry, that they know what they're talking about. Right. And so the group is very engaged. What's didn't really surprise me, I think I knew this from observing from the outside is that they all care so much about the place. And I attended the OECD conference last week.
Right.
And it was about place-based economies. And I think there's no better place than New Brunswick to describe that. You have imperial manufacturing, and they're in place. If they weren't there, that region would look very, very different. Or if you're in Saint-Quentin with Groupe Savoie, that whole region would, again, look very different than it is. And the other uniqueness, we talk about, we got strong regional coverage, strong industry in different parts. We need to augment that. But the fact that we have a port in St. John and the port of Belledune, that even gives us a much larger strategic advantage because you come with different strengths.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I've really enjoyed, and I want you to touch on it, and then I'm going to have an anecdotal thing after you finish this, but it's the amount of research that you bring to the table. And really, we've had presentations from Dr. Herb Emery from UMB and other folks. Why do you personally believe good data is important to drive a lot of these? I think your background kind of speaks to it, but why do you believe that good data and kind of that educational post-secondary research is important to the New Brunswick discussion?
Yeah, I think it's important because as the Business Council, we want to be the voice of business, not just of our members, but all all business in New Brunswick. So even though you might not be a member, we want to be able to provide you with thought leadership around what we think is important. And when you have that responsibility, I think it's very, very important to make sure that your perspective is sound and backed by data. So we want to take kind of a sober lens, a reasonable lens, considering not just our interest as industry, but the interest of the collective. And so that's why research is so important. And we bring experts in all the time who know about things more than we are. So we're a group of generalists, I would say. But my job is to bring it together so the members can digest it and represent and be our voice in a very measured and respected way.
Well, I just want to anecdotally, one of the last meetings that I attended, that just I think other members of the council would have their own stories, but as a relatively new member of your council, I was sitting there listening to the presentation by Dr. Herb Emery, and there's other members in the agri-food space that are represented around the table who we all know.
Yes.
And we are pursuing a temperature-controlled import-export cold storage facility that's very unique. On-terminal import-export, going to be very different than a lot of temperature-controlled facilities across the country. And when Dr. Emery was talking about agri-foods and the technology innovation around industrial greenhousing and vertical farming, and it being something other countries have pursued, but it hasn't been a top of mind New Brunswick economic story for the last number of decades for various reasons. I think our climate plays a role in that. But with technology layered in, it could be something we were going to pursue. So I asked him a few follow-up questions, and the wages around farming are sometimes an impediment to it looking like a major economic development opportunity. So this was all new to me because that's not a space I'm familiar with. So I was sharing with him and others the supply chain job that if you layer in with the farming job, could this be something that is that? And that has sparked a conversation that UMB's now leading directly from the president's office around what are the opportunities on temperature control, because the Moncton region plays a key role. They're along the CN rail network there. We know the Moncton Airport has done a phenomenal job in building out cargo opportunities. We have CPKC, CN rail, temperature controlled. There's many pieces here, and that all came from that one piece of research just talking about agri-foods in general, that we really now believe at the port through our temperature controlled facility, but through lots of other potential, that maybe that could become there could be the next great New Brunswick export could actually be in that agri-food space, just like McCain Foods was in the 1950s.
Well, that's great, and that's a great example. There's the reason people participate is multifaceted, and that's a great example. We want to instigate discussion and thought leadership and innovation within the council membership. So I love that story. I actually wasn't aware that had gone on.
It's all very recent.
Okay,
it's all
that's
very
awesome.
recent. So if I'm a citizen walking down Water Street in St. John, or if I'm in Fredericton or Moncton, any region of the province, and I don't know anything about the New Brunswick Business Council, what do you and someone's saying, well, what does this group do? Why is it important for my future or my kids' future of finding employment? What would be your answer to that?
I love that question. Well, I think historically in the region, we think big business is bad, and that touches a bit on the mindset pillar that I mentioned is very important to the Business Council. And I think we at the Business Council, and I say we because I feel like I am representing the collective sort of mindset, is that, we think economic growth is super important because it allows the social fabric of our province to be strong. So we feel like you can't talk about services to our most vulnerable without talking about the economy.
Absolutely.
So that's why when I'm walking down Water Street and I see a big cruise ship and I see all the the facilities around it.
The vendors,
The vendors. And I think, well, that's what a strong economy looks like. It leads to higher paying jobs, more job opportunities for jobs where you live. It means you have access to, good social services like hospitals, strong education. And so I think that's why New Brunswickers should care. And our business leaders, our multinationals are people from here. And they care about here. And that's why you see investments in like the Irving Nature Park and like in Saint-Quentin, all the investments that are made there and the investments made in Bathurst. And so I think we have people who care deeply and they want to drive the economy so we can do good things for everybody and it be an inclusive and a sustainable economy. And it's very lofty, but it's genuine.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on a couple of points that I just could not agree more with.
Okay.
We need to continue as business leaders and industry leaders making those connections to a thriving economy and what a thriving economy means to everyday people. Because they're whether you look at industry that's closed over the last number of years, new opportunities have popped up. It's been uneven, and
Yes.
and I'm very open about that, about the port. If you look at our history, kind of post World War II, and even further back to a certain extent, it is not been a growth trajectory. There's been pockets of success, undeniable success, but overall, it until recently it has been a downward trajectory, and the province in some sectors has had that as well, and we know what that means. It means less resources to be able to invest in our kids and to make sure that we have an ability to, grandkids having a job in close proximity to their family, so they don't have to go to another part of the country or the world to work.
Yes.
I mean, if we can keep hammering home those connections, a thriving economy will allow us to invest more in housing and in the social services that we all care very deeply about.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a strong connection, and I think we need to get more people talking about that and drawing those links because we need citizen support for economic growth. We need people to want to support the things that we want to invest in. And I think the days of doing things without considering inclusion, leveraging the relationships with our Indigenous communities and being responsible from an environmental and sustainability perspective, like those days are over.
Those days are over, and they should be over.
And they should be over, exactly. So I think, we need to sort of repeat that message. And I wanted to add to that, I know the port history has been tumultuous because you're a reflection of industry, right? You go with the ebbs and flows of industry. And I think that the days of our reliance on the U.S. market are over. And I'm not saying anything anyone hasn't said before. So for the ports, it means that the role of ports are even more important than they ever have been.
No question.
So I think that we need to really add a piece to the puzzle. It's like we want to grow our economy, but to grow our economy, we need the right infrastructure to get the goods that we create here and explore sectors and industries that have gone dormant.
No question. On that point, we get a lot of questions because it's been topical in the news around Sims Corner and an intersection just inland. Why is that important?
Yes.
You've already invested $250 million, with Port Authority, province, and federal dollars here. The private sector now, their total is upwards of $600 million to build the St. John Gateway in the last decade. That's CP Rail, JD Irving, DP World, all those CN Rail, all the big players. Why do you need to fix a little intersection in the middle? Well, that intersection is crucial. It's where the CN traffic goes on the Reversing Falls Bridge and goes, via Moncton to the rest of Canada. It's where the CPKC traffic and the CSX traffic into the United States connect into Dever Road in St. John and then go up to Macadam and get to the rest of the world. There are bottlenecks inland that if you want to be a gateway on all the coasts, the 5 container ports, we talk about this a lot. If you want to have a thriving trade diversification, the gateway needs to be fluid. It needs to work. And inland is often where you get those bottlenecks. And then I want you to touch on something else here. I'm moving around, but it's important because it's rail.
Rail, yes.
Rail is, we talk a lot about it at the Business Council. Rail is a huge reason why, Moncton has prospered over the last number of years. They had the CN, there was closures and economic downturn, but they capitalized beautifully as a region in Moncton. We think CPKC and our connectivity into the 3 Class 1 railways through JD Irving and MB Southern Rail is our big value proposition at the port. But how do we get others along those rail lines, like Macadam was 100 years ago, like some of these more remote communities? How do we get them thinking about economic opportunity as it relates to rail?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think I'd bring it back a few steps, and what I would say is that we need to bring industry to those regions. So, we have many of the critical minerals the world needs. We have natural resources. We have energy resources that we're not leveraging in the region. And I think the way to justify those investments and bringing those back on is to develop the economies in those regions. And when we do that, then all of a sudden it's like, people will come.
Right. I love that.
Yeah. So you got to go back to the basics. And when industry thrives, then things come and surround them. And I think that's the strategy that we should be thinking about. And New Brunswick, we need to be thinking about it in a coordinated way. We need a strong energy strategy in New Brunswick, and we in fact probably need a regional energy strategy if we want to capitalize on nation building projects. And so I think those are the fundamentals we need to think about to realize this vision that you have for rail.
Yeah, no, I love it. You've touched on so many important supply chain points, because if we're going to be, energy and critical minerals, let's focus on that for a second.
Yeah.
Because it's so important to our country, both from a competitiveness to make sure that the energy, the input costs around energy for whoever's setting up or existing companies is competitive, but then the export opportunities as well around clean energy. And if those critical minerals need to go to, a different country or a different region, you need to have the supply chain to get them there.
Yes.
Whether that's rail or truck or different. And I just think we're so well positioned with what exists today. If we make a few little
tweaks.
Modifications, we're so well positioned to be a leader in the country.
I agree. And I think, we have some know-how. We had a very thriving mining economy just over, not so long ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago. And so, I think New Brunswick needs to think about doubling down on some key sectors, our traditional sectors, and not think about just exporting the raw good, but what are some advanced manufacturing products that we can create from those raw materials. And so I think the strategy is not so complicated. It's like we should be bullish. I think we need to say, here is where we've traditionally been very good. We have an opportunity in energy. We can revive mining. And how do we leverage that and use the ports as the accelerator for that growth?
Oh, you've touched on something that I talk to our team a lot about. I think the most recent stat is about 25% of our exports now through the Port of St. John are New Brunswick based. So that means 75% are coming largely from central Canada, which is wonderful. But they're the ones capitalizing on the advanced manufacturing and the value added of the goods. They're doing the packaging and the processing and the transload and whatever it is in the community. And we know Ontario's got a strength of that, and no one wants to take that away from Ontario.
No, correct.
But
yeah.
We need to get a piece of that. We,
Yeah.
we whatever the future facility looks like or what it is, I don't know sitting here today. But we really need to have a role in that, so that we're doing more with either raw materials or things we're extracting or resources that we're harvesting in New Brunswick, we need to do something with that good before it's finished and then gets to market. Because that's the dream.
That is the dream. And you know, I have an expression I use with my kids like all the time. I say, we got to play to win. You know, and that's true in sales. I remember leading a sales group, and I'd say, like, we're playing to win. If we're not there first, if we don't deliver that proposal first, someone else will. So I think New Brunswick has to be more, I've said bullish, like, what is our winning strategy, and get really crystal clear and really buckle down on it, because we don't want to be a pass-through province. And I like, when I hear that expression, it makes I cringe, because that is the risk. And so let's look at our assets and capitalize them and get laser focused and play to win. And when you play to win in global market, it means you can compete. So our small and medium companies that are in place now, or people thinking about starting a company, we need to start thinking about, how do I export what I'm doing, and how do I create value add products or expertise in sectors. So, you know, I think the ICT sector is very important in New Brunswick, because we're servicing these very core traditional sectors that are ripe for automation and innovation and digitalization, and that expertise we can then export. Doesn't relate to the ports necessarily, but those are all very important elements to the value chain for New Brunswick.
No question. Well, Monica, your vision and passion and energy is an incredible asset, not only for the New Brunswick Business Council, but for the province. And we're really, really fortunate to have you take some time out of your tremendously busy schedule to be part of this podcast. Tell a more nuanced story. I think you've got into detail that our viewers are really going to appreciate. And I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us,
yes,
but a very bright future.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me.